I am the most notorious playboy in the capital. But no one knows that I am actually a woman. All the young ladies avoid me like venomous snakes. Except for the younger sister of the great general. She either invites me to the lake today, or takes me to admire the flowers tomorrow, afraid that she has deep feelings for me. I pull her to a quiet place and confess that I am a woman. To my surprise, she sighs with relief, thinking I was simply the younger brother of her elder sibling. Turns out that it was just the ancestral grave of my family emitting smoke. I am the legitimate son of the current prime minister, and also the most well-known playboy in the capital. I know which tavern in the capital serves the best wine. And I also know which brothel has the softest girls. Any girl with a sense of dignity would be embarrassed by just one glance from me. Everyone says, "Young Master Su, you are so wild." But in my opinion, you are the purest person. The courtesan of the Li Chun pavilion lies in my arms. Her words are as sweet as honey. I reach out and touch her chin and smile wryly. "Isn't it? This young master is the most pure-hearted toward you." We frolicked in the room for quite some time before someone knocked on the door. It was my maid, Xian Mei. Head bowed. "Young master, someone is at the manor looking for you. The master asks you to return quickly." Reluctantly, I pinched the courtesan's waist and said, "I'll come back to enjoy you another day." The courtesan shyly pushed me away, and I stood up and got into the carriage. I let out a long sigh of relief. "Xian Mei, why are you so late today?" I wiped the lipstick from my neck. "Had you come any later, I wouldn't have been able to wrap things up." Xian Mei looked at me. "Young master, someone really is looking for you." The person who came to find me was a young maid in green clothes. When I entered, I saw her standing in the middle of the main hall. Where did this beautiful maid come from? I raised my hand, about to touch her chin, but my father cleared his throat. The young maid's face turned bright red with shame. "I am a maid from the general's residence. Our young miss was saved by Master Su outside the city some days ago. Today, she specifically sent me to thank you." The young maid trembled as she spoke. "She also asked me to invite Master Su to go to the lake tomorrow." As soon as she said this, everyone in the hall widened their eyes. Not just the others, but even I was stunned to hear her say this. The noble ladies in the capital, who wouldn't avoid me like the plague. What's more, the general's residence only has one young miss, and she's the one who, with just a poem about flowers, has made a name for herself in the capital. The general's only sister, Gu Huayu. The news that Gu Huayu invited me to the lake spread quickly throughout the capital. Who spread it, I don't know, but I did hear someone say that Su Ninggai dares to provoke Miss Gu. Isn't he afraid the general will chop him into pieces? Who says I'm not afraid? At night, I dream of Gu Huaishuan holding a giant knife, cutting me in half. So I rejected Gu Huayu's invitation time and time again. What I didn't expect was that she would come to confront me. She, the general's sister, a talented young lady, blocked my way right on the street. "Young Master Su, why won't you go to the lake with me?" She stood in front of me, softly asking. People quickly gathered around us. Before I could say anything, someone in the crowd started scolding me. It was really unfair. I had just helped Gu Huayu, who almost tripped outside the city a mere half-month ago. Seeing that I remained silent, Gu Huayu narrowed her eyes and stepped closer. Could it be that young Master Su's usual actions are all just a disguise? That he actually likes men? I didn't expect her to say such a thing. The words I had prepared to politely reject her suddenly slipped away. "Huayu." Just then, a clear, cold voice sounded from behind. Gu Huaishuan walked out of the crowd, slightly furrowing his brows. "Stop being ridiculous." He had just returned from the military camp, still in his military uniform, looking particularly tall and handsome. If I am the most feared person to marry in the capital, then Gu Huaishuan is the most sought after. Not only does he hold a high position, but he is also extraordinarily handsome. What's more, marrying him means you don't even have to serve your in-laws. Even I, after hearing this, felt a little moved. Gu Huaiyu glanced at him, then looked back at me. Young Master Su. I snapped back to my senses, and immediately said, I'll go. I couldn't let him think I truly like men. Gu Huaishuan turned to look at me, and my momentum immediately dropped by half. If he says no, I would have no choice but to back down. But he didn't say anything. He took Gu Huaiyu's hand and turned to leave, saying only, Young Master Su, don't break your word. He didn't chop me. I originally thought that the lake outing would just be between me and Gu Huaiyu. I planned to touch her cheek, hold her little hand, make her think I am a lecher, and she would never want to be near me again. But I didn't expect Gu Huaishuan would come too. If I dared to do anything improper, he might just cut both my hands off. Watching him sit in the boat, serene and elegant, I felt a sudden chill on my arm. Young Master Su, you've arrived. Why don't you come aboard? He turned to look at me, and I shivered. General Gu, aren't you off duty today? I forced a smile as I got into the boat. He raised his brows slightly, took a sip of his tea. Today is a day off. That's why I thought there were more people on the street today. Gu Huaiyu climbed aboard behind me, explaining for him. It was I who invited my brother to come. Young Master Su wouldn't mind, would he? How could I mind? I quickly replied. Even if my father came, I wouldn't dare to directly refuse his face. Naturally, I wouldn't mind. I smiled at Gu Huaiyu like a scholar. To be able to go to the lake with the general and miss today is truly a great honor. Oh, really? Gu Huaishuan looked at me, and I felt a sudden pressure on my back. In my 18 years of life, I had never felt such unease. Yes or no, I couldn't decide. Luckily, Gu Huaiyu quickly changed the subject. After the lake outing, the atmosphere between us had eased considerably. Gu Huaiyu was not as fragile and elegant as the rumor suggested. Perhaps due to her family's influence, she was bold in both words and actions, and very much to my liking. On the other hand, Gu Huaishuan wouldn't speak for a long time. Just looking at him made me feel blocked. So I became particularly friendly with Gu Huaiyu. Unexpectedly, it made her like me even more. Before we left, she invited me to go flower viewing again next time. Young master, how could you agree again? Tian Meng asked me. I sighed. This time, with Gu Huaishuan around, I couldn't perform well. Next time, I'll be more flirtatious with Gu Huaiyu, and I'm sure she won't invite me again. Gu Huaiyu invited me to view the flowers on the 6th of August, so I deliberately chose a light, flirtatious outfit, and even picked up some vulgar rouge from the roadside. But to my surprise, Gu Huaishuan was there again. General Gu, you're off duty again today. I smiled wryly. Gu Huaishuan looked at me, scanning me from head to toe. Without responding, he said, Young Master Su, you're dressed rather flamboyantly today. I glanced at him sideways. I usually like dressing like this. The courtesan at Li Chun Pavilion said it looks good. Gu Huaishuan's lips tightened slightly, as though showing some distaste. Naturally, it was distasteful. Which pure and noble maiden wouldn't dislike a man who frequents brothels? Now that it was said, I decided to take the opportunity to pull out the flashy rouge from my clothes. Miss Gu invited me several times, so I feel honored, I said, handing over the rouge. Gu Huaiyu glanced at the rouge, then looked at Gu Huaishuan, and smiled wryly as she took it. Thank you, young Master Su. At this point, everything seemed to be going smoothly, but Gu Huaishuan looked at the rouge and asked me, since I came here with Huaiyu, why did young Master Su only give Huaiyu a gift? What are you trying to do with my sister? Well, by heaven's grace, I truly had no ulterior motive when I gave it. I didn't expect the general to come today, I quickly explained. He nodded, seemingly agreeing with my explanation. Just when I thought I was off the hook, he said, well, you could make up for it now. I froze for a moment, wondering if he didn't understand my words. How could I make up for it in this wilderness? He raised his fine eyebrows, looking at the jade pendant on my waist, and said, This jade pendant is quite exquisite. He really was bold. That box of rouge only cost 10 yuan, but this jade pendant was worth 5 liang of gold. I slowly took the pendant off and handed it to him, gritting my teeth as I said, "If the general likes it, then take it. Gu will gladly obey." I truly couldn't be more shameless. I once saved him, though he didn't know it. But now, thinking back, it would have been better to let him die in that cave. The mountains outside the city are covered in flowers. I heard it's because a wealthy merchant, in memory of his deceased wife, spent considerable effort planting them. The rare thing is, he never stops anyone from coming to admire the flowers. Over time, every spring and autumn, scholars and gentlemen in the city like to invite others to come here and enjoy the flowers. I watched as men and women either wrote poetry in the flower bushes or played chess in the pavilions. An idea started to form in my mind. Since I couldn't make a move on Gu Huayu, it wouldn't hurt to show affection to other women in front of her. Young Master Su doesn't seem interested in the flowers today. Gu Huaishuan walked beside me and suddenly asked, startling me. I had forgotten he was a normal man too. Compared to the flowers here, the young and beautiful women are the true rare scenery. I winked at him. "General Gu, don't you think so?" He paused for a moment. His dark eyes shifted slightly. "Flowers are flowers, people are people. How can they be mixed together?" He coughed lightly, his response serious. "Liar." His pale ear tips were clearly flushed pink, but I couldn't be bothered to pay attention to him, because I saw a familiar woman across from me. It seemed like a courtesan from Qingyue Pavilion. If I just walked over and flirted with her for a while, I could definitely make Gu Huayu embarrassed, and she would never dare to invite me out again. Thinking of this, I couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement, and took a step forward. But after walking just a few steps, I was tripped by a broken branch underfoot. With my balance unsteady, I was about to fall forward. Although the road had been lightly swept, there were still some stones and branches. If I fell, even if I didn't get injured, it would still hurt for several days. Just as I gritted my teeth and closed my eyes, someone wrapped their arm around my waist and pulled me up in an instant. When I opened my eyes, I saw a face very close to mine. It was so beautiful, even more so than 2 years ago. At that moment, Gu Huaishuan chuckled. I hurriedly pulled away from his embrace and watched him twirl his fingers. "Young Master Su, your waist seems a bit more delicate than others." Gu Huaishuan's words echoed in my mind all night. I couldn't sleep. "Don't worry, young master," Tian Meng reassured me, "when even the old palace maids can't tell. What more for General Gu, who's been in the army for years?" Tian Meng looked at my dark circles and comforted me quickly. She used a jade hairpin and a silver crown to tie up my long hair into a high bun. In the mirror, a suave young man appeared before me. Anyone would be fooled into thinking I was a man. I felt at ease. "Yes, the last time the queen's maid praised me as handsome." Tian Meng nodded. Yes. She continued adjusting my clothes. "And I also heard that because there are no women in the army, many soldiers have taken a liking to men." Before she could finish her words, I accidentally dropped my fan to the floor. Men liking men. I widened my eyes. I shouldn't have said anything, but once she said it, Gu Huaishuan's words flashed back in my mind. It was clearly something I would use to tease those courtesans. So, Gu Huaishuan didn't know I was a woman, and he had been flirting with me. Oh my god. This thought terrified me so much that I had nightmares for several nights. Later, Gu Huayu invited me a few more times, but I kept turning her down, saying I was unwell. For the next half-month, I didn't leave the house, not even going to the brothels or taverns, fearing that if I stepped outside, would run into that living demon, Gu Huaishuan. My unusual behavior finally caught the attention of my mother. "Why haven't I seen you leave the house lately?" She sat in my room, not even having a sip of tea. Before she spoke up, I glanced at her, silently taking a sip of tea. If I were to tell her that Gu Huaishuan not only liked men, but might also have feelings for me, I feared it would scare her into having nightmares too. Seeing that I didn't speak, she sighed. Is it because of Miss Gu, or because of her brother? Don't worry, Mom, I reassured her. I won't offend General Gu, knowing her concerns. I put down my teacup. Now that General Gu has the Emperor's favor, I know the implications of this. She looked at me, her gentle eyes filled with faint guilt, knowing what she was about to say. I quickly interrupted her, joking. Mom, Miss Gu is such a kind and gentle person. If you met her, you'd surely like her. But to my surprise, she didn't laugh. Instead, she seemed even more upset. At that moment, Xian Meng rushed in, looking at her with a startled expression. I immediately had a bad feeling. What's wrong? I asked her. She glanced at my mother, then whispered. General Gu has come. Gu Huaishuan was here. He said he was looking for my father. As soon as he entered the manor, he was escorted to the study. Just when I thought nothing unusual would happen today, I saw Gu Huaishuan sitting at my family's dining table. He sat across from me. After chatting with my father for a moment, he looked up at me. I heard young Master Su has been unwell recently. Are you feeling better? My hand slipped with the chopsticks. Everyone at the table turned to look at me with wide eyes. Having seen me climb a tree and break a branch just a few days ago, I quickly picked up the chopsticks that had fallen on the table and forced a dry laugh. Thank you for your concern, General. It was just a slight cough. It's already much better, I said, feeling somewhat guilty. I quickly coughed twice. Now that the weather is chilly, young Master Su should take more care. Everyone at the table looked at the ice bucket just placed beside them, and then at him. It was already summer, so it had nothing to do with being cold. Even though I've never blushed when lying, this time, I felt it was truly unbelievable. Yet he didn't find anything wrong with his statement. And as usual, he turned to chat with my father. Before beginning to eat, I couldn't bear to look at him. Quickly finishing my meal and leaving, I heard my father sigh behind me. This kid has been spoiled by his mother, causing all this trouble. General, don't mind him. Gu Huaishuan smiled. I actually find young Master Su's straightforwardness quite charming. My foot slipped on the doorstep, and I nearly stumbled forward. I was so frightened that I didn't stop, hastily leaving this troublesome place. But what I never expected was I would still run into Gu Huaishuan. He was standing with his arms crossed, leaning against the pillar of the pavilion in the lake. When he saw me turn, he called out, "Young Master Su." I froze, turning back awkwardly. General, what a coincidence. The moonlight fell, casting its glow on him, making him look unrivaled in beauty. His dark eyes seemed to shimmer with stars, and a barely perceptible smile appeared. Not a coincidence. I've been waiting for you. I swallowed hard, cursing Xian Meng for not being reliable, telling me that Gu Huaishuan had already left. Wait for me. I turned to face him, but didn't step forward. He nodded, then took a step towards me. In a few days, I will lead the army into battle. He stopped in front of me, then said coldly, I have a question for you. I looked up, confused. After a moment of hesitation, I vaguely nodded, then looked up at him. It's been half a month since I've left the house, yet I haven't heard a single whisper about this kind of good fortune. But I don't understand. Why is he telling me this in person? Unless, as I suspect, since he's about to leave, the Emperor is far away. I gritted my teeth and said, General Gu, I have a question for you. Do you like men? The early summer breeze carried a bit of restlessness, and as it brushed past me, it made my heart race with heat. Gu Huaishuan was stunned for a long while after hearing my question. Young Master Su, perhaps you have some misunderstanding of me. He seemed to be teasing, his gaze holding a hint of amusement. I'm not interested in men. I came to find you because I want you to look after Huayu in the future. I'm heading into a battle where the odds are grim, and the one I'm most worried about is Huayu. His words weighed heavily on my mind, and I felt a sudden heaviness in my heart. I wanted to find a hole to crawl into right then and there. Young Master Su has been keeping himself locked away recently. Gu Huaishuan bent down slightly, his voice soft. It's not because of this, is it? No, I quickly denied. But to my surprise, he was so close. As I looked up, my nose brushed against his face. I was so startled I stepped back a few paces. Gu Huaishuan's eyes were deep, and he nodded with a smile. Straightening up, then please take care of Huayu. His smile was so charming, like a cold crescent moon, reflecting off the shimmering lake. For a moment, I was lost in his gaze. Seeing that I was silent for a long time, he took a step forward. Young Master Su, are you unwilling? No, I was feeling guilty, my voice lowering. General, fate has favored you. You will certainly return victorious. His smile seemed to deepen, more intense than the night itself. He stared at me for a while, then said, good. His words didn't seem as frightening as the rumor suggested. Young Master. Xian Meng slipped past me from my right to my left, interrupting my thoughts. Did you really ask him that? I stopped walking, giving her a melancholic look. Don't say such things again. If it weren't for her leading me to believe it, I wouldn't have made such a fool of myself. Thankfully, Gu Huaishuan was heading off to battle, so he wouldn't be bothering me anymore. From that day on, I returned to my carefree life. That day, I had just left Lichun Pavilion, planning to buy some rouge for Xian Meng, when, not far down the road, I saw a group of people surrounding a woman in a small alley. In broad daylight, under the clear sky, in a flash, I was knocked to the ground by them. Humph. A couple of pounds of meat wants to come and be the hero. A burly man mocked me, and they were about to advance. I quickly stepped in front of the woman. I am the legitimate son of the Prime Minister, Su Ning. How dare you strike me? I threatened them, and they froze for a moment. Who in the capital didn't know me? To my surprise, they immediately knelt down. It startled me. My reputation, had it already scared them this much? Before I could speak, a burly man said, the princess is about to meet the emperor tomorrow. Stop making trouble. Come back with us. The woman behind me snorted, then circled around to the front. She turned and looked at me with a smile. Su Ning, this princess will remember you. When Xian Meng arrived with people, I was left in the alley with bruises on my face. I blinked. It was the princess of the Korchan tribe, who had recently entered the capital. I had a bad feeling. A very bad feeling. The next day, when my father returned from court, I heard that Princess Shuya had come to the capital to form a political alliance with the Great Zhou. At the dinner table, he looked up at me. Come over here. My hand trembled with the chopsticks. Marriage with Great Zhou. The emperor has 4 sons, all married. He continued. I heard you met her outside the palace yesterday. I immediately stood up. Father, I want to join the army. My mother strongly disagreed with my decision. She didn't want me to marry Princess Shuya. If I did, not only would it be a betrayal of the emperor, but it would also insult the Inner Mongolia tribe. The consequences would be dire. How could my mother not understand this? She was speechless and started to cry. I patted her back to comfort her. Don't worry, I know General Gu, and with my father's name, the people in the army won't dare make things difficult for me. Mother, you can rest assured. Though I said that, I was also a little scared. After dismissing everyone, I quietly shed a few tears under the blanket. I couldn't sleep all night. Before dawn the next day, I entered the military camp. When my father's letter reached me, saying Princess Shuya really wanted to marry me, I had already left the capital with the army. The emperor didn't suspect anything. In fact, he praised me for growing up, and for reaching an age where I understood things. Don't get too excited, Princess Shuya said. I will marry no one but you. This was the last sentence my father wrote in his letter. The smile I had on my face immediately faded. At that moment, Gu Huaishuan sat beside me. If you don't want Princess Shuya to marry you, there are many ways. Why did you choose join the army? I was startled, then threw the letter in my hand into the fire in front of me. Flames shot up, quickly swallowing the letter. A man's ambition lies in serving his country. I joined the army to achieve greatness, to bring peace and prosperity to the people. Gu Huaishuan glanced at me. After a long pause, he spoke. War is no joke. On the battlefield, swords have no eyes. There aren't enough soldiers to protect you, to help you achieve your goals. I lowered my eyes slightly. I understood. He was unhappy that the soldiers had been serving me, treating me like the son of the prime minister, instead of like a true soldier. General Gu, I looked up at him, speaking in a tone I'd never used before. I don't take this lightly, at least not now. After seeing the refugees displaced by war on the side of the road, I can no longer treat this as a joke. Gu Huaishuan looked at me without saying anything. The firelight flickered in his dark eyes. After a while, he stood up. Su Ning, from tomorrow on, if you want to leave again, you'll be a deserter. You know what that means. I stood up as well, glaring directly into his eyes, speaking every word clearly. I, Su Ning, will never be a deserter. Though I was the most notorious young master in the capital, I was also the son of the prime minister. I had learned the 6 arts that every noble young master should know, and I had mastered them all, especially archery. None of the other young masters in the capital could match me. After hitting the bullseye, the soldiers around me cheered for me. But Gu Huaishuan, he walked leisurely to my side, took the bow from my hand, and with an arrow someone handed to him, he shot the arrow I had fired, splitting it in two. The soldiers who had been cheering for me fell silent. I looked up and glared at him, but he didn't look at me, just threw the bow back into my hand. Weak. Even if you strike the enemy's heart with a sword, it's not guaranteed to kill. I watched his figure receding, tightening my grip on the bow. You wait. For the next month, I either traveled or practiced strengthening my arms. When we arrived at the border city, I was already able to lift a stone about 1 meter high, and my arrow could pierce through the bullseye, straight into the stone behind it. Even Zhang Yi, who had doubted me before, praised me as a rare talent for the military. But Gu Huaishuan, every time he passed me, he cast a glance at me. His expression, completely different from how he acted in the capital, was terribly annoying. And the most frustrating part was, he wouldn't let me go to the battlefield. Why? I stood outside his tent, blocking his way. He was in full armor, exuding an aura of coldness. This is a military order. He didn't look at me, and bypassed me without a word. Just as I turned to chase after him, Zhang Yi stopped me. Su Ning, military orders are like mountains. His short words left me with no way to argue. The days that followed, the battle raged on, and I practiced day in and day out. Soldiers were sent out in groups, and many were carried back injured or dead. Every time I asked to join, I was turned down. 2 months later, Gu Huaishuan was ambushed in the Black Tiger Mountain by the enemy, and went missing. When the news came, my arrow missed the target for the first time. The most important thing now was to find the general. Zhang Yi stayed calm, and started making plans like Gu Huaishuan. I stood in the corner, raising my hand. I'll go find him. Who in the army didn't know that I, Su Ning, was the son of the prime minister? No one would dare to risk my injury or death. So Gu Huaishuan wouldn't even let me step onto the battlefield. Zhang Yi looked at me, instinctively about to reject my suggestion. At that moment, someone rushed in, breathing heavily as they reported the situation ahead. Time was tight. Gu Huaishuan had only kept me off the battlefield. So you all go to fight. I'll go find him. It wasn't against military orders. I walked through the crowd and reached the deputy's side. If there's any issue, I'll take full responsibility when General Gu returns. The deputy still wasn't fully convinced, insisting on sending a small squad with me. There were too many people. It would be too obvious. So I only took 3 men with me. We left the city in the dead of night, heading straight for Black Tiger Mountain. In just a few days, we nearly turned the whole mountain upside down, but still found no sign of him. Further ahead was the territory of the Kingdom of Wu. A man blocked my path. I stared at the distant city, and a thought suddenly crossed my mind. You all stay here. If I haven't returned in 3 days, say I'm dead when you go back to the camp." Before they could react, I took the lead and entered the small path ahead. Chung City was the border of Wu. It housed troops and stored a lot of grain, so entry and exit were strictly monitored. I traded a jade pendant with a farmer outside the city for farmer clothes, and after much negotiation with the gatekeeper, I managed to enter the city. Chung City wasn't small. Finding someone here wasn't easy. That night, someone knocked on my door. The visitor was unfamiliar, with a somewhat shady look, but I recognized him by his eyes. It was Gu Huaishuan, who had disappeared for several days. He hadn't returned home. Did he not want me anymore? I pouted in a playful tone. He paused for a moment, then hugged me into the room. "Don't be angry. Tomorrow I'll take you to buy the most beautiful rouge." He entered my room without hesitation, not asking why I was dressed as a man or what I was doing here. He lowered his voice, with a slight hint of anger. "You're courting death, coming here alone. Had you not disappeared, I wouldn't have come here either." I lowered my voice as well, and for a while, neither of us said anything. After a long time, the sound of the night watch came from outside. He raised his hand to extinguish the light in the room. Although I was raised as a man, I had only been close to young women. But now, in the dark, lying on the same bed as Gu Huaishuan, before I could think of the chaos that might follow, an arrow suddenly flew in from outside. Gu Huaishuan turned and pulled me into his embrace. The darkness in the room, only our breathing could be heard. His warm breath fell on my head. For a moment, I almost forgot to breathe. Not long after, footsteps approached in the corridor. "Go." He pulled me through the window, and we jumped into the cold river below. He had clearly been here before, so the escape route was already planned. We followed the river and found a gap beneath the city wall, making our escape smoothly. It was almost too easy, so when Gu Huaishuan collapsed behind me, I was completely unprepared. The same cave, the same serious injuries, the same fever that wouldn't subside. I sighed. "I really owe you." I didn't know when he had gotten injured, but the worst was the wound on his arm. From the arrow he got while protecting me, I didn't expect it to be that deep. It looked like a chunk of flesh had been gouged out. It wasn't until today that I understood. He wasn't just speaking carelessly. My archery really was just average. This was the second time I saved him, and I had some experience now. I found some herbs to stop the bleeding and applied them to his wounds. Then I stripped away his clothes to cool him down. If he still hadn't cooled down by midnight, there was only one last resort left. I gritted my teeth, whispering, "Just stay alive for me." The echo of my words rang in the cave, along with the howl of a wolf outside. I was so scared I curled up next to Gu Huaishuan. He lay still, the weak firelight casting shadows on his handsome face. For a moment, I lost my thoughts. I had first heard of him at a banquet in the palace. A soldier in armor knelt, saying that Gu Huaishuan had taken the head of the enemy general, and that the battle was a great victory. Back then, I thought, he must be a ruthless man. But unexpectedly, a few months later, I met him in the mountains 10 miles from the capital. At that time, he shot a wolf that was near me, then left without a word. And later, a year passed. I had returned to the capital from my grandfather's house, only to be ambushed by bandits, and had to hide in the mountains, where I found Gu Huaishuan badly injured and unconscious in a cave. Actually, I was born a man. My reputation never mattered to me. But after that day, when I undressed to cool him down, I realized something about myself had changed. Gu Huaishuan. I crouched next to him, calling him softly. He didn't even flinch. Sighing, I muttered, "You promised me you'd come back safely." When Gu Huaishuan woke up, I was holding his dagger, facing the black wolf at the cave entrance. The wolf had been pacing there for a while, probably hungry. Suddenly, it bared its fangs and lunged at me. I cried out in surprise, but before I could react, a hand grabbed mine from behind, and with a swift movement, the dagger was driven into the wolf's neck. Warm blood splattered on my face. I blinked, staring at the black wolf as it collapsed to the ground. I couldn't even kill a wolf. How could I step onto the battlefield? Gu Huaixian's low, husky voice reached me from behind. It felt like rough paper pressing against my heart. I felt a wave of emotion I had been holding back. It all came rushing forward. My father always said I was a man, not a woman. Men don't shed tears easily, he would say. So I grew up always appearing carefree, pretending to care for nothing. But secretly, I had cried 3 times under the covers. But now, I looked down at my torn and dirty homespun gown. For once, I allowed myself to be a woman, just for this moment. I turned and buried my face in Gu Huaixian's chest. I didn't argue with him. I bit my lip and quietly sobbed. Gu Huaixian seemed surprised by my reaction. He stood frozen for a moment, then gently patted my back. "It's okay. It's okay." His voice softened, like a breeze across the lake. "Don't be afraid, I'm here." His words were repeated in my heart, and suddenly, all the tension that had been coiled up inside me loosened. I fell into a deep sleep, exhausted. When I opened my eyes again, it was already daylight. Gu Huaixian returned with a few wild fruits in his hands, shirtless. I had to admit, his physique was incredible. His features were sharp, his muscles well-defined, and even the feel of his skin was firm and strong. I quickly stopped myself from thinking too much about it. None of us mentioned what happened yesterday. After a brief rest, we prepared to head back to camp. 3 days had passed, and I feared that the army had already spread the news of my death. When he saw me in farmer's clothes, I finally realized and let out an awkward laugh. I had forgotten. Quickly explained, the guards at the city gate were too strict. They searched every man thoroughly, so I had no choice but to disguise myself as a woman. "How do I look? Do I pass?" I gave him a playful wink, but he turned his face away, his ears turning pink. "Doesn't look like it at all," he muttered. Gu Huaixian's injuries were quite serious. He managed to make it back to the camp, but collapsed once again. He hadn't made a sound on the journey. I thought his injuries had been healing, but thankfully, they were all external wounds. The army's doctor gave him several prescriptions, and the fever subsided. After a few days of rest, it wasn't too serious. Still, I couldn't help but feel guilty. With his arm injured, he couldn't move much, so I did many things for him in his stead. As luck would have it, just as I was dressing Gu Huaixian, Gu Huaiyu burst in, her voice trailing off. "Brother, they said you were hurt." I froze, my hand still on his waist, and I realized what Xinxue had said might be true. Now, anyone who saw us would surely think I had a soft spot for men. I glared at Gu Huaixian. If it weren't for him insisting I help him dress, this wouldn't have happened. "Miss Gu, what's going on?" I awkwardly turned around, only to find Princess Shuya had appeared behind Gu Huaiyu. Gu Huaiyu was here, and so was Shuya. For a moment, I became the topic of conversation in the entire camp. "Master Su is quite something," they whispered. 2 women fighting over him. As I passed one of them, I kicked him to the ground. "Be careful, or General Gu might rip out your tongue," I warned him fiercely. After that, I went back to serving Gu Huaixian. If I had any complaints before, now I just considered him my safe harbor. "You seem to dislike Guaiyu." Gu Huaixian chuckled, lying on the couch, watching me. "Not at all," I quickly responded. "And you don't like Princess Shuya either?" "Not at all," I replied again, wringing a towel as I walked over to him. A feeling of frustration stirred in me. For the first time in 18 years, I felt like women were such a hassle. "So, do you want to marry both of them?" I quickly shook my head. "I'm not that lucky." Gu Huaixian adjusted himself, letting me wipe his arm. His eyes held a smile, but there was a slyness to it that I hadn't noticed. He spoke softly. "If it's the case, I have an idea." I looked up, confused. "What idea?" Before I could finish my sentence, he grabbed my arm, and just as the curtain was lifted, he pulled me towards him and laid me down on the couch, half in his arms. I couldn't see who came in, but I heard a sharp gasp, and then felt his arms around my waist, his hand pressing my head down. "Get out," he ordered in a low, commanding voice. "It's Zhang Yi." I heard Zhang Ye's panicked voice from the other side of the curtain, followed by the sound of the curtain being lifted as he hurriedly left. I looked up at Gu Huaixian. "What are you doing?" His Adam's apple bobbed as he moved his hand from behind me and gently covered my eyes. His warm palm was rough against my skin. "This is the plan," he said. That damn Gu Huaixin. From that day on, everyone in the army knew that I was involved with him. I swear, I didn't. I grabbed Zhang Ye's hand and tried to explain. It was just an accident. I fell that day. Zhang Ye recoiled, like he had seen a ghost. He pulled his hand away and took a respectful step back. Thank you for your hard work. Hard work? What's so hard about it? I was deeply hurt by what had happened. The only good thing was that Gu Huaiyu and Princess Shuya believed the rumors. Every day, Princess Shuya, who had been trailing behind me, would now avoid me whenever she saw me. Gu Huaiyu, however, didn't avoid me. She pulled me into a secluded corner and looked at me, seemingly struggling to say something. Are you really? Her eyes held a hint of despair. To be honest, I had no idea why she liked me. Shuya, I could understand. As a noblewoman of the capital, she would know that I had a bad reputation. I sighed. But Miss Gu, I will not marry you. Nor will I marry Princess Shuya. She blinked. Half of her despair faded. Then who do you want to marry? I won't marry anyone. Her despair returned. You're just pretending. It doesn't make sense. Miss Gu, I'll tell you a secret, but you can't tell anyone. She looked at me curiously, raising her hand. I swear. I leaned close to her ear. I'm a woman. Her eyes grew wide with shock. Then she turned to me in disbelief. I nodded. Her shock slowly turned into excitement, and she nearly jumped up with joy. It feels too unnatural, I thought. The Gu siblings both felt a bit strange. Aside from Gu Huaiyu, everyone else was convinced that I wasn't just a soft man, but that I was deeply in love with Gu Huaixin. I was so angry that I rushed into Gu Huaixin's tent. Now, the rumors are flying. You have to take responsibility. But to my surprise, he was changing clothes, wearing only his underpants. He turned around and smiled faintly. Now, who is responsible for whom? I quickly turned my back, realizing that I was a man. I turned back with great difficulty. It's not like I haven't seen you like this. He winked at me. Well, that's indeed something I should be responsible for. Gu Huaixin was about to leave the city again. Although I still had some anger toward him, I couldn't help but remind him to be careful, thinking back to the last time. But he didn't even look up. You should come too. I froze for a moment, then quickly realized that he had actually agreed to let me go to the battlefield. I rushed up to him. Really? Really? He spoke to me while leading a team of soldiers, saying that we were going to scout military intelligence. After hearing this, I immediately felt a rush of excitement, my heart racing. Scouting military intelligence. Though I had never experienced it before, the idea itself was thrilling. Gu Huaixin smiled slightly when he saw my reaction, as if he was indulging my desire for adventure. However, that moment of joy didn't last long. I suddenly realized that this scouting mission was no simple task. Military intelligence, the battlefield, this wasn't just about labor or training. It represented a true life and death choice. Gu Huaixin seemed to see through my thoughts, and he whispered, this isn't just about scouting, Aning. This will be a true test of life and death. I couldn't shake the feeling that Gu Huaixin hadn't told me everything. Later, Gu Huaiyu sat under the peach tree, her hands propping up her face as she looked at me. I took a sip of tea, adjusting my skirt awkwardly. Then didn't I die later? We encountered an enemy ambush in a gorge. At that moment, I was on edge, thinking it would be a fierce battle. I told myself that I couldn't drag everyone down. But to my surprise, it was all a scheme that Gu Huaixin had orchestrated to make me fake my death and escape. A perfect escape plan. Gu Huaiyu, with some sympathy, patted my head. Aning, oh Aning, from now on, you'll be yourself. But it's all for my brother. End.